Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Robert. I'll be your host. Let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be meeting with author and historian Derek Anderson, and he's going to be talking about his book, Improbable Voices, A History of the World Since 1450, seen from 26 unusual perspectives. So before we turn things over to Derek and let him do this thing, let's just do a few housekeeping or introductory type items. If you haven't done so already, we always welcome people to introduce themselves. So in the Zoom chat or the Q&A or the comment section, if you're watching on Facebook, if you want to tell us your first name, where you're connecting from, and if you could meet one historical person, who would you pick? So it's always fascinating to find out where people are joining us from and then also learn more about them. In fact, if you wouldn't mind, I have a quick poll question for you. So a poll question is ask people something really basic. And today's poll question is, where are you joining us from? So whenever you're giving a presentation, it's always helpful to learn a little bit about your audience. So let me go ahead and launch this question. There's 4 answers. Are you in the Washington, D.C. metro area? Are you in the United States, but outside the Washington, D.C. area? Are you in the UK, or are you somewhere else outside the US and the UK? So I'll leave that open for a few seconds, and then I'll share the results. And again, just kind of a helpful piece of information for Derek and I is when you're a presenter, always helpful to know a little bit about your audience. So I'll leave that up for a few seconds, share the results. Looks like we have an extremely geographically diverse group today. And let's see, I'll share the results in just a second. I'll let a few more people respond. Let's see, we're up to 75% of the audience has participated. We'll get a quorum if we can get a little bit higher, like to 80%. We always shoot for 80%, so we need a few more people to vote. We're getting there. We're up to 78. We're up to 79. Can we get a few more? We need like one more person. You can do it. Okay,
there we go.
All right, we have it. I'll go ahead and share the results. So let's see, a quarter of you are in the Washington, D.C. area. 50% of you are in the United States, but outside the DC area. 13% are in the UK. That's really cool. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And then 12% outside the US and the UK. So there you go. So we have 74% in the US and about a quarter of you somewhere else. So Derek, you have a very geographically diverse group today. So something for you to keep in mind. I'll go ahead and stop sharing the poll results. If they still show up on your screen, you can always hit the X button, minimize them, or drag them down to the bottom of the screen. Hold on for 1 second. Okay, hold on for 1 second. Okay. And then we don't have time in these programs, unfortunately, to do a Zoom demonstration, but just real quick, there's usually only a couple things that people want to know how to do. One is how to adjust the sound. So everyone will be in listen only mode except for Derek, myself, and Mary Beth. If you do want to raise or lower the volume on your session, you can check the settings locally on your own device. We did a sound test earlier. Everything seems to be working fine. If you want to adjust the screen display so that the slides that we're showing take up the full screen, and if that's not currently happening for you, look for something in your Zoom session called view or view options. It's usually up at the top of the screen, and you can click off something called side by side mode, and it should take care of that. Throughout our program today, if you have any questions or comments or technical issues or anything else you want to discuss or ask, feel free to utilize the Zoom chat and the Q&A. Mary Beth and I will be monitoring that. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can type that in the comments section. Let's see. And for those of you that don't remember, make sure everyone's in the right spot. We're talking about Improbable Voices, a really excellent book. And for those of you not familiar with us, we're Washington, D.C. History and Culture. We're a nonprofit community organization. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Robert Kellerman. I'm the founder and the director of the Washington, D.C. History and Culture organization. And what we used to do before COVID is our organization used to do museum tours and walks and whatnot throughout the Washington, D.C. area. We'd go to concerts and film screenings. We have a book discussion group, but because of Zoom, we've switched over to this online format, which is really fascinating because we're able to connect with people from all over the world, including Derek. So my name is Robert. I'm split my time between Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas. I think Mary Beth is joining us from Annapolis, Maryland. And Derek, where are you at today?
I'm in San Rafael, California.
Okay, awesome. And then we have 25% of our participants are from somewhere outside the US and the UK. So hold on for 1 second. Okay, just taking care of a few technical things. So this is the book that we're going to be talking about. So what's going to happen is Derek's going to do a presentation and kind of walk us through the book. And he's going to focus on 3 of the 26 unusual perspectives. So you can keep that in mind. And if you haven't purchased the books already, you can check that out. I just was curious to know what the Amazon, this is where I got mine at, but you can buy the book in a lot of different sources. And you can see on Amazon, it's got a 5-star rating. So that's pretty awesome. And Mary Beth and I have been going through the book. So again, Derek will do a presentation. He's going to focus on 3 of the 26 individuals he featured and kind of go over some just general information. And then when he gets done, we'll ask any questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Derek in just a minute. We are recording this program for our YouTube page. So if you at some point in time have to jump off or you want to watch it again, or you know someone that else that might be interested, you can find it on Washington, D.C. History and Culture on YouTube. I'll send out the link once we're done. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to my friend Derek Anderson in California. Derek, take it away. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, Robert, Mary Beth. I really appreciate the warm welcome. I think it's really amazing that your organization has been able to pivot so well in these COVID times. And I think it really speaks well of everyone. They're taking advantage of the programming that was once just limited to DC and is now, for the whole world. So thank you so much for the invitation. I am going to share my screen here and start with this little presentation. What I'd really love to do is to begin talking a little bit about the structure and the scope of the book, and then profile, as Robert said, a couple of characters from the book, and then hear your comments and take your questions and see what we can learn together about history. My goal in writing Improbable Voices was to try to tell the history of the early modern and modern period from the perspective of 26 people who were not household names, who were relative unknowns. There's one there's one letter figure for each letter of the English alphabet. And these people are also presented chronologically so that the book has a chronological basis as well. Actually, sort of fitting all of this together was the great puzzle that I challenged myself with. And it was honestly one of the best parts of the whole thing for me, was having the chance to sort of create this puzzle. It's important to note, though, that the book is not just, as my students would call it, a random biography collection. There's also a narrative history that goes through the book as well. And as such, it includes politics and economics and sociology and religion and sexuality and all sorts of other things. My goal was to try to weave the biographies of the 26 individuals with the broader themes that sort of matter in world history since 1450. Lots and lots of world histories have been written, but honestly, I don't know of another one like this one. Thomas Carlyle famously said that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. And indeed, there are many books, millions of books probably, and very good books at that are dedicated to the famous. And I think this is sort of natural. I think we're drawn to bold, decisive figures, both for good and bad, because I think that they provide us with such fascinating narratives. They make for great storytelling. And it's almost as if biography is in our blood in some way. But what I wanted to try to do was, instead of tell another great world history to try to do something a little bit different and tell us a little bit about some people who are not, household names. There are two things that I'd sort of like to try to do today. First, I'd like to challenge the idea that only the famous, decisive people make for great stories. And then the second thing is to sort of give you a little bit of a sense of the fabric for the book and how I've tried to interweave the biographies with the broader themes. There are certainly figures in my book, both men and women, who do a fine job of honoring Thomas Carlyle's premise. But what I kind of wondered today was, since you're all such good students of history, that it might be more interesting to spend some time looking at the other side of the coin. In fact, I think that there are times when we can learn more about the complexity of our past by examining the lives of those who suffered from uncertainty or ambivalence in key moments of their lives. It's in those moments of indecision, I think, that perhaps we can learn even more about the past. So to accomplish these two things, I have selected three people. They come from different centuries, 3 different centuries in 3 different countries. All 3 of them have some type of character-defining ambivalence about them. The personal hesitancy in 2 of the figures helped me to understand the tenor of an era in a way that I had not in the past before my research. And the third, the hesitancy, helped me to understand the transition between one historical era and another. And so it helped me to understand history in new ways. So let's jump in. Here are the 3 that I've selected from the book, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about each. The first figure is Wolfgang Capital. He's seen here on the left. He was a German theologian whose life paralleled that of Martin Luther's in many, many ways. Both men were born within 5 years of one another in small German towns. Both had fathers named Hans, and both complained bitterly about their educational experiences growing up, and neither one would ever be mistaken as being a particularly good student. But most significantly for the historical record is that they became priests, and in both cases, they took their clerical vows against their father's explicit wishes. Now, because Capital's life is so deeply involved with theological considerations, I do want to pause and sort of review some of the background to the Reformation. And I hope that this overview will be helpful to you. If you already know all of this, I apologize, bear with me. So prior to the Reformation, Christians in the West demonstrated their faithfulness primarily by participating in the rituals and in the practices of the Catholic Church. These centered on the 7 sacraments: baptism, confirmation, confession, communion, anointing the sick, and then either marriage or taking holy orders and becoming a nun or a priest. These were some of the things that you could do to sort of prove that you were being faithful. All of these things were considered good works. They were things that you could do to earn God's love. They were tangible things you could do. There are some other examples as well, such as going on a pilgrimage or abstaining from meat on Fridays, or participating in some of the things that this detail of a painting by Bruegel the Younger shows, like caring for the sick, burying the dead, feeding the hungry, caring for the poor, those kinds of things. All of these were things that you could tangibly do to earn salvation for the next life and minimize your time in purgatory. All of these things were about doing. They were about doing things and showing God that you believed. And as I'm sure that many of you remember, another thing that people could do was purchase indulgences. These were certificates that were issued to lessen one's time in purgatory, and they too were a justifiable good work. Purchasers were making personal financial sacrifices for Holy Mother Church in order to earn additional merit. And what's really interesting is they still have their perfectly valid form of a good work for the Catholic Church today. The picture on the right is I was walking near St. Peter's Square a couple of years ago, and stumbled across this shop that was issuing essentially indulgences people blessings that you could then go have blessed by the Pope later in the day. So on October 31st, 1517, Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door in Wittenberg, Germany. He didn't mean to cause the second major split in Christianity. He didn't mean to start the Reformation. He simply wanted to inform his fellow clergymen that the indulgences that were being issued by Johann Tetzel to build the new St. Peter's Basilica in Rome had faults, that he wasn't sure that they had merit. They were written in Latin. They weren't meant for the general public, and that's why I love this image on the right so much. Is that there's Luther, pounding the theses into the door, and yet everyday people are just going about their business and ignoring him. And for me, it captures sort of the origins of the Reformation. But of course, the snowball began to roll. And eventually, Luther's actions forced all of Christendom to decide whether to join the protest, Protestant, or remain loyal to the Catholic Church. It was at this point that the propaganda becomes quite vicious. This is a Protestant woodcut showing the devil sitting on an indulgence, right? And he's holding out a cash box while he's eating clergy, and the figure on the far left there is, you can see he's the Pope with a papal crown carrying the key to St. Peter's keys to heaven. So this is a Protestant reaction to the church. What I found so interesting in my research about Capito is that the choice to become a Protestant wasn't just a spiritual decision. It wasn't just a matter of faith. It was also an economic decision for him. And honestly, this was sort of new ground for me before I started writing Improbable Voices. Indeed, the financial considerations created an ambivalence in Capito, and his ambivalence helped me to understand the Reformation in a broader, deeper, richer kind of way. A little bit more background. Capito was quite receptive to Luther's ideas initially, but by 1520, it became clear that he could not continue to support Luther and continue to work for his employer, who was Albrecht, the Archbishop of Mainz. A picture of Albrecht on the left, and a 19th century painting of the Mainz Cathedral on the right. He couldn't live in both camps. He was going to have to choose. And that would mean that he would have to make a decision between his personal security, financial security, and his theological understanding and what he believed. And it's going to be a tough decision. But significantly, Capito, rather than making the choice, looks for a different way out. He looks for an alternative. And what he ends up looking for is a source of independent financial security that would allow him to remain faithful to the church and not lose all of his friends who were increasingly turning towards Luther and Luther's ideas. The solution for Capito was to become a canon with a prebend in Strasbourg. A canon was a priest who was tied to a particular church or monastery, but who did not take the same vows as monks. Canons remained in public, and they did not embrace the austerity that I think most of us associated with a monastic life. A prebend was an office with an endowment attached to it. The person who held the office gained all of the income that the endowment produced. The endowment would come from taxes and tithes, whether in kind or in cash, as seen in these two illustrations. And the endowment would then allow you to have an income. In 1520, papal officials recommend that Capito be awarded the prebend in Strasbourg in order to keep the eloquent and well-connected preacher in the Catholic fold. So Capito arrived in Strasbourg with its soaring cathedral and its half-timbered houses in June of 1523, hoping to take this prebend and avoid sort of the religious divisiveness that was engulfing the Holy Roman Empire. But it was not to be. Both Catholics and reformers demanded a clarification of his position. And so Capito, in the end, had to choose between his desire to remain in the church and his agreement with Luther about the central importance of gospel in faith. By July, the full Reformation had come to Strasbourg, and Capito had made his decision to join the reformers. As I've said, this choice was as much a calculating political decision as it was a spiritual one. He believed that he had, for financial reasons, to stay in Strasbourg and collect the money from the prebend, which by this point was no longer controlled by the Catholics. The best illustration of Capito's ambivalence and hesitation centers on something called the sacramentarian controversy. And this involved the purpose, meaning, and integrity of the Mass. In the Catholic tradition, the priest transforms the bread into the body of Christ in a process known as transubstantiation. The priest does this so that another soul may be nourished by Christ's body. Here on the left, we see Pope Francis performing this ceremony. Similarly, in the Catholic tradition, the local parish priest transforms the wine literally into Christ's blood. By the 1520s, however, some reformers were really beginning to argue that what happened in the Mass was symbolic, that it wasn't real, that the bread and the wine were merely symbols of Jesus's body and Jesus's blood, not the actual things themselves. This was a position that Luther absolutely refused to accept. He believed actually that the Catholics were correct in their interpretation of the Mass, and that when the priest said the body of Christ during the Eucharist, this was exactly what people received during communion. Now, what's interesting is that Capito hedged his bets in this controversy. He didn't want to take a definitive stand in hopes that a compromised position might be able to be found. In his correspondence, he uses different language to try to appease Catholics and Lutherans and more radical Protestants. It's fascinating. There are days when he's writing on the same day 3 different letters with 3 different wording to 3 different audiences. He's trying to find a compromised language. He travels, he cajoles, he meets in an effort to achieve this kind of reconciliation. And he believed, his motivation for this was that he believed it was the only way to really prevent social disorder and public confusion. It was the only way to bring peace to Europe, was that we had to have some sort of reconciliation. But after all, everyone was Christian, so why couldn't we find a compromised language? That was Capito's view. He once said, "Our salvation does not consist of words, but in the power of God." And therefore, there had to be a compromise that could be found. There were many attempts to try to find such a compromise, but both Catholics initiated them and Lutherans initiated them. But none of these meetings, none of these events sort of resolved the fundamental differences in interpretation about what happened with the Eucharist. Europe remained at an impasse. In fact, it wasn't until 1536 that a compromised language was found among several, but not all, of the Christian factions. This is known as the Wittenberg Concord, and it's a document that proclaimed a universal understanding of the meaning of the Eucharist, but its wording, through sacramental unity, the bread is the body of Christ, was still open to multiple interpretations. This is a painting of an anonymous painter, and it clearly shows, Reformation leaders, Luther sitting there in the center. Capito may be the figure on the far left with the arrow, but he may not have made the cut, actually. But what's really important is that the language that comes out of Wittenberg is exactly the language that Capito had been seeking for the past 20 years of his life, an inclusive language that could satisfy all. He sought to heal and to find common ground. And I understand that some will not find this willingness to vacillate and to compromise admirable, but I think that Capito's ambivalence helps us to understand how difficult the Reformation actually was for so many people. There were souls at stake, as well as real economic and political considerations and calculations to make. Capito's hesitation and cautiousness, I think, shows this really well. This is a portrait of Capito in a church in Strasbourg, New St. Peter's Church. And his expression to me seems full of timidity. It seems full of timidness. And I think that seems to define the Reformation in a way that I think that few of us tend to think about. Excuse me. The second figure that I'd like to profile from Improbable Voices today is a woman named Lapenasse. She became a salonière, and she provides us with a unique understanding, I think, of the transition between the Enlightenment and Romanticism. Lapenasse was born in Lyon in 1732. Her mother was of aristocratic background, but she gave birth out of wedlock. And rather than abandon Lapenasse to an orphanage, however, the mother created the illusion of a legitimate birth in the church records. And so Lapenasse was initially raised believing that she had legitimate parentage. When she was 19, she learned the truth, however, and this meant that she had few promising prospects given the social confines of the day. In fact, given the social expectations of the Ancien Regime society, Lapenasse's future sort of looked bleak until this woman named Madame du Deffand came along and came to her rescue. The older woman was nearly blind and needed the assistance of a younger woman to help her. And in exchange for this help, Madame du Deffand offered to train Lapenasse in the ways of the proper world. Paris's 18th century salons were important entertainment centers for the elite, and they had a very clearly delineated code of behavior. Participants had to possess and exhibit what was known as sociabilité. Doing so proved that they were part of le monde, that they were a part of polite society. And then frankly, I'm not quite sure that either of these popular depictions of salon and salon culture capture the rigors of the expectations. Instead, I'm going to turn to some words from Rousseau. The tone of the conversation is flowing and natural. It is neither weighty nor frivolous. It is knowledgeable, but not pedantic, cheerful, but not loud, polite, but unaffected, gallant, but not moody, ironic, not equivocal. You hear neither dissertations nor castaway wit. There is discussion without argument. Honestly, it doesn't sound like very much fun to me, but at least people could say that they were in Paris. After a decade of tutelage and learning about how best to host a salon with this particular atmosphere, Lapenasse found herself hungering for something more intellectual and more meaningful, something that was less frivolous and less affected. In fact, she wanted to participate in Enlightenment culture, that intellectual trend which focused above all else on the power of reason. In April of 1764, Lapenasse had a falling out with her mentor, Madame du Deffand, because of Lapenasse's increasingly independent streak. Du Deffand threw Lapenasse out of her house and hoped to discredit Lapenasse entirely. But Lapenasse saw this as a golden opportunity, a unique moment, and she decided that she would set up her own salon instead. She could not compete with the other fine salons in Paris. She didn't have the kind of wealth to be able to do that. She couldn't host the grand dinner parties. But what she decided to do instead was offer something new. And what she quickly developed was the foremost intellectually oriented salon in Paris. She replaced parties and games with ideas and logic. In La Panace's new salon, people could speak their minds, and they were allowed to talk about things that were simply forbidden to talk about elsewhere. She, in fact, created a nursery for the intellect, and in doing so, she cultivated a large number of famous people to her circle, people such as D'Alembert and Diderot, David Hume, and Adam Smith. That she also welcomed people who were not of the highest aristocratic background also meant that her salon had a different atmosphere to it, and this helped to further the exchange of ideas. This helped to further the exploration of rationality. Indeed, the environment that La Panace created in her Parisian apartment near Invalides seems to have almost foreshadowed the great ideas of the French Revolution: liberté, égalité, fraternité. She created this world through extensive preparation and hard work, spent much of her days reading and writing in preparation for the evening salon. La Panace would have remained solely identified as this curator of ideals, of the ideals of the Age of Enlightenment, had it not been for the discovery of her love letters, which were published in 1809, some 33 years after her death. These love letters involved two different men. The first was the son of the Spanish ambassador to France. His name was Mora. And the second was a French aristocrat by the name of Guibert. And Guibert is seen here in this etching. Both were about 12 years younger than La Panace, and there were lots of infatuations all around, but neither man was truly an honest candidate for a marriage because of La Panace's illegitimate birth. It was quite a love triangle, but it was going to be an empty one. La Panace wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters to Guibert and Mora, but especially the Guibert ones have survived. And these are anything but symbols of rational thought. Instead, they're full of contradictory emotions: love, jealousy, self-loathing, joy, anger, unworthiness. And given the polite society of Le Monde, they are scandalously direct and honest. Indeed, they almost seem as if they're from another era. After the whole chaos of the French Revolution, Romanticism came to followed the Enlightenment as the dominant cultural movement. And Romanticism influenced many, many different fields: music, art, literature. But it also evoked tragedy in many cases. And that too became a part of La Panace's story. Guibert marries a 16-year-old from a wealthy family, and Mora dies of tuberculosis in 1774. This combination, the loss of both of her great loves, was devastating for La Panace. She had long been addicted to opium. She had used it for a long time, but she began to use it in even greater quantities after 1774, and her health declined precipitously as a result. She died on May 23rd, 1776. And ironically, none of her good friends seemed to know about the love triangle or the emotional strain that took on her. I found La Panace's story and her life and her letters to be fascinating because it helped me measure and understand the dialogue between 18th century Enlightenment and 19th century Romanticism in a new way. The former is not just about the mind, nor is the latter just about emotion. It is in the blended ambiguity of each, and an ambiguity that I think is personified by La Panace, that we can understand the transition between them. And that's why I found the research for that chapter so interesting. The last figure that I would like to profile today for you is a Chinese general named Shu. Excuse me. Despite not always being allied with Mao Zedong, Xu survived all of the turmoil of the Long March, the Chinese Revolution, and the Cultural Revolution. He even becomes a major figure, military figure, in the Deng era after Mao's death. Very, very few people in Xu's generation were able to navigate all of the chaos of 20th century China successfully. And so my question became, how did he do it? How did he survive? I'm going to pick up Xu's story in 1929 when he is already a leading military commander for what is still at that time a very small communist movement. At this point, China is very much at war with itself. It is dominated by warlords. The nationalists are the second largest group in power, and the communists are sort of almost an afterthought. And all three of these groups are fighting against the other two and with one another. Xu was the military commander of something called the Ouyuan Soviet. From his central base, he was able to conduct raids on three different provinces that were all controlled by the nationalists. And for 3 years, Xu successfully stymied efforts of the nationalists to eradicate the communists from this base. Then in June of 1932, Xu led the Fourth Army on a 1,500-mile strategic retreat through hostile territory to Sichuan, where he helped organize a new Soviet that was actually quite well supported by the local population. In all of this, we learned that Xu was certainly an excellent manager and organizer. Like all communist military commanders, Xu had to answer to a political commissar. For the army was to act on the party's behalf. It wasn't an independent entity. The army was the party's army. And the commissar then would make the political decisions, and it became Xu's job to decide how to implement those decisions through military means. The political commissar for the Fourth Army was a man named Zhang. Zhang was, like Mao, one of the original 13 founding members of the Chinese Communist Party. The problem for Xu, as well as for almost any other Chinese communist in the leadership, was that Zhang and Mao disliked each other immensely. They also disagreed with one another about almost everything. This began with even the fundamental character of the army. Should it be a specially trained professional army, as Zhang thought, or should it be a much more broad-based, inclusive people's army, as Mao envisioned? Similarly, the two men disagreed over the need and the wisdom of cooperating with the nationalists in something like the wake of the Japanese invasion of China in 1937. Mao suggested that it was a necessary evil, while Zhang consistently thought that the policy was foolish and wasteful. The leaders also disagreed with where the party should base itself, whether in northern China or in southern China. And as if all of this weren't enough, Mao and Zhang both were ruthless narcissists. Neither believed that the other could lead the party to victory. One day in September of 1935, as the Long March's odyssey continued, Xu was forced not once, but twice to choose sides between Mao and Zhang. The two moments come just 12 hours apart, and both were the biggest decisions of his military career. The story is really quite complicated, but very briefly, there were originally two armies, Mao's First Army and Zhang's Fourth Army. Zhang made the proposal that the armies should separate from one another in order to cross a particularly difficult expanse known as the grasslands. This area of swampland on an 11,000-foot plateau in northern Sichuan was probably the most difficult part of the Long March to deal with. And so Zhang proposes that the armies separate. To promote unity and trust, however, the leading military commanders of the two armies were to switch assignments. This meant that Xu was to join Mao's army, and then in the middle of the crossing, Shu got a secret order from Zhang to abandon Mao and bring his army back to Zhang's position. Shu was being asked to choose between his loyalty to Zhang and his institutional loyalty to the Communist Party. In the end, Shu's loyalty to Zhang won out. Shu obeys Zhang's command and leads the First Army south. Then came the news that Mao and some of the First Army had responded to this situation by fleeing north. Shu at this point has to choose whether or not to take advantage of his military superiority and pursue Mao or not. In his memoirs, Shu confides that the tension is overpowering. I did not know what to think. I sat on my bed speechless for half an hour. My heart was heavy. My head was numb. I was in such a bad mood. I threw myself on the bed, covered my head with a quilt, and did not speak a word. This hesitation, this paralysis in an experienced military commander is astonishing. But it's also a moment that helps to measure and understand the intensity of the political infighting, both within the Communist Party and within the army in 1935. Choosing a side was literally a matter of life or death, and Shu fully understood this. I'm not sure that all of the members in the Chinese leadership realized the stakes. In the end, Shu tempered his first decision to join Zhang by deciding, In the end, Shu tempered his first decision to join Zhang by deciding not to pursue Mao. Shu did not want to be the one who was responsible for an outright inter-party civil war. Shu simply said, the Red Army does not fire upon itself. He let Mao go his own way. It was a decision that Mao never forgot, and it was the one that allowed Shu to survive Mao's era. There's one other instance in Shu's life I'd like to mention briefly, and it occurs in October of 1950, when the party and the leadership are trying to debate the wisdom of a military intervention in Korea and during the Korean War. And despite being a senior military official at this point with a good reputation for logistics and technical details, Shu did not take part in the debate. Instead, claiming illness, he retreats to a sanitarium on the coast and waits there until the final decision has been made. Once back in Beijing, Shu simply described the decision to intervene in Korea as wise. He did not want to risk the consequences of being on the wrong side of the decision to go to war. This little tidbit of information underscores for me the value of being cautious in Mao's era. It affirms the value of prudence in uncertain times. And prudence is not, I'm guessing, a word that most of us would associate with 20th century China. I do want to emphasize that not all of the 26 figures in Improbable Voices possess these characteristics that I've tried to highlight in Capital, Lapenas, and Shu. And I do also want to acknowledge that there were times when even these three figures could be decisive and bold. One example of this comes actually in 1969, when Shu helped write a report about foreign policy in the Cold War. And he and his fellow marshals come to the conclusion that it's time to play the American card. It's time to take advantage of the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. And this represented a major shift in the foreign policy of China and China's understanding and view of the world. This shift in orientation eventually paves the way for Nixon's famous visit to China in 1972. So there are times when even somebody like Shu, who was pretty cautious, would come out with bold decisions. But I do hope that from this presentation that you've been able to see how I was able to use indecision, waffling, and contradiction in the lives of Capito, Lapenas, and Shu to help me gauge the true complexity of the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and Mao's China. I found their ambivalent qualities to be illuminating windows onto the past, and I think that this allowed me to treat what are fairly familiar topics with a new understanding. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your questions and your comments.
Okay, awesome. Bravo, Derek. Thank you. That was excellent. So the people that are listening, I was talking to Derek when we were organizing this presentation. I told him I really liked the concept of his book because so many times in history, we focus on what's known as the great man theory of history, where we only focus on these great men that were involved in different things. And so it's really interesting approach to pick 26 not well-known people and what can we learn from history from them. So really, congratulate Derek on his book and putting it together. I guess a few questions for you, Derek. How did you come up with this idea to write a book like this? Because it is so unique and so different. How did you come up with this kind of vision or inspiration?
Well, thank you. I actually, back in 2012, was teaching from another book. It's called The History of the World with 100 Objects.
Oh, okay.
And,
yep.
It's a collection of objects in the British Museum, and then telling the history of the world through those objects. It's a great book. But I was lying awake one night in March of 2012, and I got to thinking about my class and teaching this book, and I thought, well, are there other ways in which the story might be told? Are there other ways? And people was an obvious choice, but then how many people and which people? And then eventually that led me to one for each letter of the alphabet, and then putting the puzzle together. So what's interesting is it came out of my teaching.
Well, that's awesome. And then, so did you start out with how did you come up with the 26 people? Did you have like a list of 100 and you narrowed it down, or you started out with 10 and expanded to 26, or a little bit of both? How did that come about?
I made nominations. I had this list of nominees for each letter of the alphabet, and used some resources that lots of libraries have gotten rid of because of the internet. And well, who would actually want still Webster's biographical dictionary, right, which has little teeny blurbs on lots and lots of people. But since I needed to identify people by century and by alphabet, it was the perfect resource, right? It's that crazy thing where you can't, if you don't know to look for something, how do you know it exists, right? Mm-hmm. And I work with this as a librarian all the time with people. But when you were presenting with this kind of source, it had lists of names, and I just went through and made nominees, and they had to fit in the right century, and I also looked for an enormous geographical distribution so that I could get, a better representation from people around the world.
Yeah, you must have needed like a Rubik's Cube to be able to fit all these people in these geographies and times.
It was a nice puzzle. It was really fun.
I won't ask you who the 27th person was. What about Hi, Mary Beth. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Oh, Mary Beth is on mute. Hold on. I was like, why is she waving her hands? There you are, Mary Beth. I thought you were signing the presentation to people when I saw it. Oh, did I unmute you again? Hold on for 1 second. Okay.
There.
Hi, Mary Beth. I thought you were signing the presentation to people.
I need to learn. So thank you, Derek. This was just such an amazing. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat, but I really wanted to your frame on the uncertainty and ambivalence. And I think, in these uncertain days that we have right now too, that was really kind of my takeaway for these three characters, mm-hmm. that their human spirit just wouldn't be suppressed.
I agree. And I think that perhaps because of things that have happened in this country in the last 4 or 5 years, that I wonder if I was almost unconsciously drawn to some people who had sort of a a middle ground where they weren't sort of A or B, that they were, because I worry about democracy in a world where we are so divided as a country. And I think that may have helped me embrace some of the ambiguity and some of the ambivalence. And I think that's part of our lives. Like, we don't know. Things are happening. We don't know necessarily what's the right decision, what's the right choice. And examining those, I think, helps us understand history a little bit better.
Because at the time, they didn't know either.
They didn't know, yeah. Yeah.
Hindsight's always great.
It is great, but...
So, there's a lot of questions. I was going to, Robert, I'm just going to kind of maybe start at the top.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I know there was something that came up about COVID lockdown. Yeah, here it is. It's from Patty. Among religious freedoms debate triggered by COVID lockdown, whether virus could or could not live on and be spread through transubstantiated hosts. So I think you do address COVID in the book. Is that?
Yeah, Derek, you talked about the virus transmission, how it was a big debate in France and how they approached it differently than they did in the UK, which is amazing because we're having that debate now, COVID.
Yeah.
Were there other questions we wanted to deal with?
Yeah, let me.
So this is the book. Here it is. It's pretty thick, but it reads really quickly, because what happens is, because it's broken up into the 26 sections, you start on one, you want to hurry up and get through and see what happens to the person, and then that one's over with, and then you're on to the next one. But this is the book, and I really think it's awesome.
Thank you. It is really a long book, but it can be read as a collection of essays. Each one's about 30 pages, and so it is a little bit more digestible. I think that part of the length was I wanted to kind of honor the complexity of people's lives as well. It's pretty easy to sort of just reduce things down to the minimum. And I think what I was hoping to be able to do is actually show the complexity. So, for example, in the first chapter on Albuquerque, there's a part where
the person, not the city.
Yeah, this person, yeah, Alfonso Albuquerque. He's going up the Arabian Peninsula, and he's raiding Arab sites, and that could be one sentence. But I took the time to sort of explore why he was doing that and what happened, and how that then formed the pattern that he did later. In order to sort of appreciate that, well, that was an important moment in his life. And so for me, one of the struggles was finding that balance between how much is necessary to celebrate the richness of someone's life versus how much is too much information.
Oh, yeah. No, I thought it was really refreshing from like an intellectual standpoint, because we live in a soundbite world now, and everything's very short and condensed. I don't know if you talked about this earlier. How did you come up with what's the significance of the 1450 date?
Originally it was going to be 1500, but one of the characters is, in particular, Eleni. She's this Ethiopian regent who serves as regent 3 times, and an amazing woman. But she dies in 1525, but her most important years are before 1500. And I had to have Eleni, and therefore that changed the chronology by 50 years. So
okay, no problem. And then
I don't know.
Okay, numerous people asked in the chat and the comments what you're working on now. So I don't know if you're working on Improbable Voices Part 2 before 1450, or 26 more people since 1450, or the book just came out in the last year, so you're probably recuperating. And
I am. I mean, we're not even 6 months into this yet, and so I'm sure that there will be something else. I really haven't given that much thought yet. I'm trying to enjoy this moment as much as I can.
So now is your chance to vote. if you want part 2 to be people before 1450, let us know in the comments. If you want it to be 26 more people after 1450, you can let Derek know.
No pressure, Derek.
We'll pass that feedback on to you.
Okay.
Oh, I see some people are typing both.
Okay.
Well, you know, on kind of like a reverse thing, Linda wants to know, did you have to boot somebody because you already had someone of that letter?
Oh yeah, probably some people got the cut.
Yeah, well, and this is a little
cutting room floor,
but like the original V character was going to be Vargas, this dictator from Brazil in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, and I wasn't inspired. I just wasn't. I don't know. The more I researched, the less enthusiastic I became, and so I started looking around, but I really wanted someone from Brazil, and I really needed somebody else from Latin America, which is already a little bit underrepresented in the book. And but I found Villalobos, and this modernist composer, and he was a wonderful substitute, and their connections actually with Vargas. But so that was one of those that I'd started down one road and then backed off and changed it, midstream.
Okay, no problem. What about as you were researching and traveling the prep work, any interesting stories like, yeah, I was in this cafe in Paris one time and
I'm not sure I'm going to pull off
crazy travel stories
Fitzgerald or anything. Yeah, I actually was thinking about this. The theme for chapter A is this monument outside of Lisbon for Albuquerque, and I couldn't have executed the chapter without seeing the monument in person. Right, the pictures online just didn't have the detail, and so going there was great. One of the chapter S is about Kate Shepard. She brings she's the first suffragette to win the vote at a national level for women in New Zealand. And I was supposed to, I went to New Zealand in 2015 to do research, but most of her papers are in Christchurch. And as it turns out, there was that devastating earthquake in New Zealand in 2010. And so most of her papers just weren't accessible to me. I mean, I had to sort of use other sources. But that was one of those where you try and you just don't quite get there. And then I had students, take advantage. I borrowed. I had some students who were going to Vietnam actually, and I had them take some pictures for me. And so this really has been a communal group effort in many ways.
Okay.
But no, I don't have any great stories about smoky bars with whiskey and Fitzgerald or something,
Or those French salons, right?
Yes.
I've always wanted to be a fly on the wall on one of those. That's kind of like my period of special interest. And I just, the 18th century is just so chatty and catty.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah, it's
clearly I'm not hanging out in the right places.
Right. So
quite a few people asked. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Well, just again, focus on the people. I mean, it's like Wendy wants to know: are these people better known in the places where they lived than maybe they are to us? Are they part of the narrative there?
Yes, and I'm very conscious that we have a international audience here. I think that part of the premise was that these are 26 people who are not well known by Americans. I think for several of the cases, there's a Iranian Shah that is for letter Q, and most Iranians would know that history, right? But I don't think most Americans have ever heard of him. So yes, I think that's very fair.
Yeah.
I was telling Derek on the phone that I really like the section that talks about Vietnam from 1762 to 1820, because a lot of Americans don't know anything about Vietnam before the war took place, and if they do, maybe just about the French time starting in the 1800s. But this particular section I thought was really fascinating. It was my favorite section of the book. So I like that a lot as well. Quite a few people asked about audio versions. Maybe you haven't gotten to that.
I haven't gotten to that.
You got to recruit 26 volunteers to read off the audio section of the book.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea, actually.
Yeah, because I know one area that when I was reading about Shu, you mentioned when they were, in the Tibet area, and they were trying to recruit the women and how important that was in that whole egalitarian equality thing. And do you know off the top of your head, could you have included a woman who is maybe a part of the communist movement?
Yes. So
that's another addition.
It could be. There's 7 women included as featured in the book, and then there are also a number of women who play enormously important roles as mothers or as wives, really as partners to some of the male figures in the book, but they didn't have the right letter of their last name, so there's the problem. And the other thing is that I'm not a linguist, and if I read Chinese and Arabic and German, it would be a better book, and there'd be more things that would have opened up to me. But given the constraints I had, there's a fascinating book. I'm blanking on the name right now, but it tells the story of the Long March from the perspective of women. And what's interesting is that Mao didn't want anything to do with women and didn't want women to be part of the march, but Shu felt like he actually has a women's regiment, and he expects them to do exactly what the male regiments are doing. He holds them accountable in exactly the same way. He sends them on the toughest assignments, actually. And so, again, it's one of those where women are actually playing an important role, even if the chapter heading doesn't say it.
Yeah, okay, fascinating.
Is this the first book you've written, Derek? The first book you published?
Yes, it certainly is.
Okay, and then how long was the process from the time at 3 o'clock in the morning when the idea came to your head until it was available for sale?
It's March of 2012 to November.
Oh gosh,
2000.
8.5 years.
8.5 years. Yeah.
Wow, quite a journey. Okay, so that being said, that's why it might take a little while for volume 2 to come out, since volume 1 took 8.5 years. So
don't hold your breath.
We'll check back on Zoom 8.5 years.
I just really love it as a teaching tool too. I can see so many uses for it in the classroom, and as an example of how to explore a period of history through the life of a person rather than the narrative that we get through the history book.
Thank you. I invite people to check out the website, improbablevoices.com. There are discussion questions for every single one of the chapters. I do think it could work as a book group kind of thing. There are also things for classroom teachers, and so I'm trying to meet lots of different audiences there. But the end for anyone who's reading it, if you need more illustrations and more examples, the website has a lot of supplemental material that I hope will help enhance people's understanding.
Great, thank you. Do we have that link in the chat, Robert? If not, I can put it up, I think.
Oh, yeah, if you want to post that. Let's see. God, I was going to ask a question. I lost my train of thought. Oh, quite a few people, moving away from the book, quite a few people wanted to know what historical figures, just more well-known ones, intrigue you the most. Quite a few people wanted to know that.
Wow.
Maybe prompted by the fact that we had that icebreaker question when people were logging on, ask them if they could meet one historical person, who would they? That might have prompted the question.
My background in training is actually as a modern Europeanist. It's what I majored in college and taught for many, many years before moving to world history. I've always been intrigued by Louis XIV. How could this guy be so right about so many things and so stupid about others? I mean, it was just this. And so there's this part of me that I've always kind of wanted to meet him and sort of find out, well, which on balance, which side is he brilliant or is he stupid? I mean, that's kind of, but yeah, I actually started a new class with my students here at Marin Academy just a few weeks ago, and it's how I began my classes. If you could go back in time, where would you go and when? And I got all of their answers, and then the question was, well, where would I go? And I probably would go to the Dutch Republic in the 1650s, because it again, there's that difference between you read about something and then you wonder, well, what's it really like? And I love the art from the period. I love the egalitarianism of the period in Holland, and I think it'd be an interesting time to go see. But I don't have a specific person I want to see there. I think it would be the era, in general. So
I don't know. I think one of these days they're going to have time travel. I mean, I know it seems far-fetched. 100 years ago, they probably couldn't visualize the internet or people landing on the moon. So who knows what the future has in store? See what takes place. Mary Beth, any other questions for anybody?
Is there anybody in, let's see, Peggy's asking, is there anybody in fairly recent times that you would like to analyze? And there are a couple other questions too, more like focusing on the present and the future, like where you might see things going, and based on your research, any predictions that you would like to make, like which country or person, but I do like that question of the contemporary one, where maybe somebody who would represent an era that we, in this.
Well,
Twitter.
I have one letter, one figure for the 21st century, and that's the last letter. I chose this climatologist who works at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC. Part of it is I really wanted a woman, and I really felt like the environmental issues are, so important for us right now. And so that's the only figure I have, and I would love to have the chance to meet her and sort of understand how hard it must be to work in a field that is potentially so full of doom and gloom. Like, how do you keep going forth? But I'll also say this: I think that historians, we need the context of the passage of time, right? It's really hard to evaluate something in the moment, and it's only with perspective that we can gain an understanding of something's significance. So I can pick up the paper, and there are talks between Biden and Japan right now over what to do about China. Well, only time will tell whether there's been a change in policy of American policy or Japanese policy in reaction. And does this meeting actually mean something in 10 years, or is it just another meeting amongst heads of state? And that's the kind of thing that I'm reminded of as a historian, that current events are very hard to figure out and predict because things change so quickly.
Right. Yeah. And Susan would like to know, is the reading level appropriate for high school students, or is that enough there?
I geared it probably for college freshmen. So if you've got, upper level high school as junior seniors who've got some, I would say, talent, some talent, more talented students, it would work pretty well. Kids are going to have to like to read. There is that. But my audience was twofold. It was adults who were interested in history, and then kind of college freshmen. That was where I was trying to put the reading level.
Or I'm thinking of like honors high school, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Derek, I was thinking about what you just said a minute ago, and there was a really excellent book that came out in 1978 by Michael Hart called The 100, a ranking of influential persons in history. And I read it about 10 years after it came out, and that was a really fascinating book. But he made kind of, in my opinion, kind of some projections on how important certain things were or were not, like, for instance, communism. And so if he was to maybe revisit that, or someone was, they probably would adjust the ranking, just, just in the past, say, quarter of a century or 30 years, so many things have changed in the world. So yeah, that was a really interesting point you brought up about, in the modern current times, you kind of need that historical perspective, but it's ever changing, and who knows what the future has in store. So
that's actually an important book. I was given that book as a present when I was a high school freshman when it came out because of my new history or budding history and interest in history. And so I actually had thought about that is when I was sitting there on that sleepless night in March and thinking, well, how many people? Well, 100 people, yeah, but that's been done. So it's actually that book helped push me towards 26.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. It is a really interesting book. I liked it a lot. It's called The 100, a ranking of the most influential person in history. It's by Michael Hart. It came out in 1970. It's a little bit controversial just because he ranks people from number 1 to number 100. And I think Americans in particular would be shocked by the fact that there's not a huge, it's not 50 Americans and 50 other people. There's only a handful. And he has really highly rated the guy that invented paper. Number 2. I think Muhammad was number 1. And
that's my memory. And Jesus was
the guy that invented paper was number 2, and Jesus was number 3. And he has all these other interesting, like, for instance, he picked President Kennedy, and he chose him partially because he really felt like Kennedy's push towards putting people on the moon would really kind of spur things later on. But I think maybe with NASA and stuff, you could maybe say that, well, that's maybe not quite as important now. Maybe, I don't know, it's kind of debatable, but it's really fascinating. So it's interesting. I didn't know that you were familiar with that book, but because when I saw your book, it kind of reminded me back to my college days.
Well, one thing that I'm going to try to conflate a couple questions here together, or in comments. So Susan notes, it feels to me like the year 2020 was the beginning of a new era of some kind, and asking whether you feel like, you see this as an era of transition, especially as Sophia said, there are thoughts on other voices, especially race, and insofar as they are changing world politics, some alternate paradigms and ways of looking at history apart just from the Western point of view. And so that, again, is sort of, I know we don't have a crystal ball, but I do believe we are in an era of transition, and I don't know what thoughts you might have on it.
I agree. I do think that Improbable Voices fits a bit within that conversation, that national conversation about looking at alternative perspectives and unrepresented voices and communities. I think if we are in a transition, and if you look at something like what's happened in the state of Georgia in the last 6 months, how will that ultimately pan out? That's what makes it hard to know. But I do think that between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement and some of the other social movements, they are bringing to the fore topics and conversations that we as Americans have not had in the past, and that can only be for the good. I mean, that can only be the more we talk. What I worry about is we'll stop talking. But as long as we're talking, then I think there's an opportunity for us all to learn.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. As something pops up, you tend to think, well, gee, is this the start of something where we're going to go off in a different trajectory, or is this just an anomaly, or is there going to be some reaction the opposite way and the pendulum to swing 180 degrees? So yeah, really kind of fascinating to think about how any type of current thing will impact the future and whatnot. So really,
and I'm thinking of Prince Harry and Meghan. How there's so many different strings there, you know, and the whole royalty and the monarchy in England and the changing role of the monarchy. And so it's kind of a fascinating story to watch that unfold.
It is. I mean, I've lived my whole life, you know, singing "God Save the Queen." I'm not sure I can get used to the idea of saying "God Save the King." You know,
right?
It would be very hard, but
right.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, hello and shout out to all of our friends joining us in London or in the UK. We have a satellite or sister group called London History and Culture, and we have a meetup and a Facebook page. And just as an American, I have British ancestry when I go back a couple of generations, but I really enjoyed reading just the comments and whatnot from people in the UK, because sometimes, you know, they're all exact same as the US and sometimes completely different. And it's really been helpful for me as a, you know, as a global citizen to learn what other people are thinking in different countries and, you know, different ideas, or even just different generations also too. You know, people that are younger than I or older than I. So really fascinating.
Yeah. And that's the one thing I really liked about your approach, Derek. It really gave me sort of a global sense of being a global citizen, you know, because understanding that all these different forces, sometimes when you think about the different events in the different countries and the commonalities, like even the three characters shows how they, you know, they all had that sense of ambiguity, but they were caught up and they did the best that they could in a difficult time, you know, and that's amazing.
As I think most of us try to do. I mean, I think that we may not always succeed, but I do believe that most people try to do the best that they can with the circumstances that they're facing. And
Yeah, like you talked about La Panasse and the challenges she faced coming from an illegitimate parenting background. Right. You know, to me, like, you know, who cares? It's not even, and I think most people now would think like, well, you know, what's the big deal? Why does that even matter? But, you know, back then that was a really important social norm. And then she had to work very hard to overcome all that. And I actually thought the stories were very inspiring. These people that are in these situations and they're kind of maybe boxed in and they find some way to do whatever it is they're trying to do or kind of overcome the moment, so to speak. I oftentimes think of history as being very inspiring. You know, like, okay, well, these people overcame their challenges. I should be able to overcome anything that I'm facing.
Mm-hmm.
I am a college football fan, and I love rooting for the underdog. So it's always fun.
Yeah, just because you're down by 2 touchdowns, you know, it's only the first quarter. Got a long way to go. A lot can happen. There's onside kicks and turnovers, and you just never know.
And Valerie has kind of an interesting comment that sort of falls in here. She says, "Improbable Voices is such a compelling title because we need to examine who gets to tell our story." So, you know, it's I think that shift in history and, you know, her story, his story, you know, and if we want, I'd like to come up with a non-gender title to that as well. But just our story might be the way to do it.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
Tell us more, if you don't mind, about the classes you teach. Like, what kind of teaching do you do, and what subjects do you? I'm sure it has a history focus, but anything in particular that you focus on your specialties?
I've taught a variety along. This is my 35th year of teaching. So I have taught
35. How old? What did you start when you were 6 years old?
But
child prodigy.
I have taught a lot of different courses. Some of the favorites along the way, I taught a European history course based on biographies. Penguin published this wonderful little series of short biographies of people that I used in class. And that was a great way in. I then moved to world history and taught a course through architecture. So using like great monuments, if you could figure out why a civilization built, whether it was the Giza pyramids or the Taj Mahal or Chichen Itza or Bora Bora, you could understand that culture and you could understand that civilization. So that was a great one. I really enjoyed that. And then more recently, I've moved to this interdisciplinary course that teaches, where I'm teaching both history, but then also art history and studio art. So I asked my kids to investigate a particular empire or culture, and then asked them to research that culture and write a paper, but then also to give a presentation on a particular piece of art from that culture, and then to actually try to create a work of art of their own that honors that culture. So it's a new one for me. I'm in my second year, I think, of doing that. So,
do you think students now are more like globally aware than they were when, say, you were in school? Just because of the internet and videos and all that stuff?
Yeah, they are. They are very aware, and they're very cognizant about how the things that are going to happen in the next 10, 15 years are going to determine, their life in big ways. They are far brighter than I am. The only advantage I have is experience. But they, thank God. But they are cautiously optimistic, I think, about the future, but also deeply concerned, and looking for ways that they can make a difference and make the world a better place.
Yeah, because you're in California, and we talked about this when we were on the phone one time. I'm originally from Detroit, and I've spent most of my life living on the East Coast, but I lived in Los Angeles for 5 years, and I was really I took a California history class when I moved, and I was really shocked. I thought I knew quite a bit about history, but it was really East Coast bias. There wasn't really much information either in high school or college about, anything that happened, on the West Coast. So, and that's still within America,
right.
Extrapolate that out, like, not knowing a lot about what happens in, Vietnam and France and China and Russia and, places like South Africa and stuff like that. So just really amazing. So it's nice the younger folks are a little more internationally diverse than perhaps when I was their age.
I think they are. I think they're looking for, they understand that it's a global world, and they understand that how what happens in one place can affect something, half a world away. And part of that is driven by the internet, and part of that's driven by social media, and part of that's driven by climate, and part of that's driven by COVID. I mean, COVID has done this. It's just reinforced the issues of globalization and how it spread. So.
Right. And what grade level do you teach, Derek?
I teach mainly seniors, high school seniors. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're the last line of defense before they go off into adulthood, out into the real world.
I used to live in the Bay Area, and I know, boy, you have at Marin Academy. It's a beautiful campus. So.
Thank you. It's a great place.
I think I would have stayed there 35 years.
Okay, well, we've been going on for a while, so why don't we let you go?
I think we're good in the chat. And yeah, so you teach at the Marin Academy, right?
I do. One
final question. Yeah.
Okay. I want to
again, I just really appreciate there's such a unique approach to presenting history. I just love the concept and the idea. So
thank you.
Putting this together. Maybe you can come back in a little bit and talk about maybe 3 more figures. Because
I would love to.
I'd love to hear about any of your thoughts on any of the other 23. They were just really all interesting.
Well, thank you. I would love to pick another theme around 3 and come back and talk to the group. I appreciate the amazing comments in the chat and the suggestions that people are making. They are wonderfully on target. Robert, Mary Beth, thank you so much for hosting and for making this happen, and for everyone to come and give me this chance to talk a little bit about my book. And if there's anything I can do for anyone out there, please do let me know.
Oh yeah, no problem. So you weren't able to see the all the chat and comments, Derek. What I'll do is I'll save them and then I'll email them to you just so you can read through them. Yeah, you got a huge amount of praise and thanks. And
yes, a lot of thanks
for your book. So thank you so much. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. This concludes our program. Hope to see you at some point in time in the near future. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll all see each other in person in someday in the near future.
That would be great. That would be great.
Okay,
take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.